In a small neighborhood on the outskirts of San Francisco, life followed familiar rhythms. People knew each other, greeted one another, and looked after each other. Anyone passing through frequently might have noticed a young girl named Sophia standing by her window each morning. She always waited for Steph Curry, the NBA superstar who had made the Bay Area his home and become a beloved part of the community, to drive by on his way to the practice facility. Every day, Sophia would wave enthusiastically, and every day, Steph would smile and wave back, sometimes honking his horn just to make her smile. Over time, this became part of his routine, something he looked forward to. A small ray of sunshine before his day truly began. Steph had grown fond of Sophia since the first time he saw her, her small face lighting up with excitement whenever she spotted his car coming down the street. He didn't know much about her, only that she was always there, looking happy, and that her greeting never failed to make him feel good. It was something so simple, but it reminded him why he had chosen to live in a community like this, where people feel connected in small but meaningful ways. One Wednesday morning, as Steph drove through his neighborhood, something felt off. He looked toward Sophia's window, expecting to see her there, smiling and waving as always. But this time, the window was empty. The curtains were closed, and there was no trace of the little girl. He tried to brush away the uncomfortable feeling that settled in his chest. Maybe she was sick or had an appointment. But as the day went on, he couldn't shake the image of that empty window from his head. Something wasn't right, and the more he thought about it, the stronger the feeling became. By the time he was heading back home that evening, Steph knew he had to go check on her. He couldn't shake that feeling, and the Northern California weather had been unpredictable lately, which made him worry even more. He drove to Sophia's street and parked his car in front of her house. Everything was too quiet, too silent. He approached the front door and knocked, hoping someone would answer, but no sound came from inside. He knocked again, harder this time, but still no response. Steph frowned, a growing concern in his stomach. He walked to the side of the house, peering through windows, but everything was dark. He was about to return to his car when he heard it. A faint sound, almost like a whimper. Steph's heart skipped a beat. He approached the side door and tried the handle. To his surprise, it was unlocked. He pushed the door open, calling softly, "Hello? It's Steph. Is anyone home?" He entered the house, which was eerily silent, with the air heavy with an unsettling stillness. Following the sound, Steph made his way down the narrow hallway, his heart beating faster with each step. Finally, he reached a small room at the end of the hall, and there, on the floor, was Sophia. She looked pale, her eyes half closed and her breathing shallow. Steph's chest tightened with fear. He rushed to her side, carefully lifting her into his arms. "Little one, can you hear me?" he asked, his voice trembling. She let out a weak moan, her small body limp in his arms. Without wasting another second, Steph carried her out of the house and quickly took her to his car. He drove as fast as he could to the nearest hospital in San Francisco, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Every now and then, he glanced at Sophia, her head resting on the seat and her eyes closed. "Hang on, little one," he whispered, his heart full of worry. When they arrived at the hospital, nurses and doctors quickly took Sophia from Steph's arms and rushed her to the emergency room. Steph stood there, feeling helpless, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea what was wrong with her, but he knew one thing. If he hadn't followed his intuition, if he hadn't gone looking for her, Sophia wouldn't have made it in time. He paced back and forth in the waiting room, his mind filled with concerns, waiting and praying that Sophia would be okay. Hours later, a doctor finally came out to speak with him. He gave Steph a small smile, his eyes tired but kind. "She's stable," he said. "Her name is Sophia, and she was severely dehydrated and malnourished. It's fortunate you brought her in when you did. She's strong, but she'll need time to recover." Steph let out a sigh of relief, not realizing he had been holding his breath. "Can I see her?" he asked, his voice barely audible. The doctor nodded and led him to Sophia's room. Steph entered, his heart clenching at the sight of her in the hospital bed, with an IV in her arm, her face still pale, but with a slight improvement. He approached her bed, pulled up a chair, and sat beside her. Sophia slowly opened her eyes, focusing her gaze on him. A small smile appeared on her lips. "Steph," she whispered in a weak voice. Steph smiled, tears in his eyes. "Hey there, little one," he said softly. "You scared me, you know that?" Sophia looked at him with eyes full of gratitude. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice barely audible. Steph gently stroked her hair, brushing a strand away from her face. "Of course," he replied. "I'll always be here for you. You're not alone." During the following days, Steph couldn't stop thinking about Sophia. Every time he saw her in her hospital bed, with her pale face and tired eyes, an unsettling feeling took hold of his heart. Although she was stable, he knew there was something more, something deeper that he couldn't ignore. It wasn't just about having saved a child in that moment, but about understanding what had led her to such a critical situation. Steph dedicated himself to visiting Sophia every day, without fail. At first, he limited himself to bringing stuffed animals and books, things he knew the little girl had always liked. He also brought some of her favorite snacks, the ones they used to share on sunny days when he passed by in his car on the way to practice. In those moments, Sophia would smile shyly at him, her eyes beginning to shine again, but there was still something in her gaze that told Steph the girl was trapped in a darker world than he had imagined. One afternoon, after Sophia had eaten, Steph sat next to her and in a soft voice asked about her life. He didn't want to pressure her, but something inside him needed to know. The girl looked down, her small hands rubbing together nervously. That's when, in a thin voice, she told him about her mother. My mom isn't always home," said Sophia, her eyes clouded with sadness. "Sometimes she goes away for days, sometimes longer. She tells me not to bother her, but I feel lonely." Steph's heart sank upon hearing those words. He knew what that meant. Addiction was a silent but devastating battle, and Sophia was trapped in it through no fault of her own. She hadn't just been neglected, but emotionally abandoned by the person she needed most. Steph felt a mixture of anger and pain, thinking about what Sophia must have experienced. The loneliness that surrounded her while her mother fought her demons. That night, Steph couldn't sleep. He woke up several times thinking about how he could help Sophia. He knew he couldn't just stand by, but he also understood that his role was limited. However, deep in his being, something told him he had to do more, that his connection with Sophia had reached a point where he couldn't just be a spectator. He had to intervene, and if that meant facing something bigger than himself, then he would do it. The next day, Steph spoke with social workers and doctors attending to Sophia to understand more about her situation, what had happened in her life before she arrived at the hospital. After several meetings, he discovered the painful truth. Sophia had been living in an unstable environment without any supervision, while her mother struggled with a severe addiction. She had been fed scraps, dressed in dirty clothes, and had gone days, sometimes weeks, without anyone caring for her well-being. The hours of solitude had marked the child, and sadness was reflected in each of her gestures. Steph couldn't let Sophia fall back into that dark cycle of abandonment. The weight of what he had discovered about her life, about the neglect and suffering she had endured, haunted him every minute. That feeling in his stomach, that pressure that didn't leave him alone since he found her in her house, told him he couldn't simply turn the page. If he did nothing, if he didn't take action, he knew that Sophia would remain trapped in her own hell, fighting alone without the protection and love that every child deserves. He couldn't live with himself knowing he could have done more. With determination, he began to move heaven and earth to ensure that Sophia would be under proper care. He trusted no one but himself to guarantee that she would have the opportunity to rebuild her life. He contacted social services, and after many meetings, paperwork, and long hours of waiting, they found a foster family willing to open the doors of their home to her. But Steph wasn't willing to leave anything to chance. He wasn't satisfied with the simple idea that a family would adopt her. He needed to be completely sure that this family could offer what Sophia needed: a safe refuge, a place where she could heal, grow, and feel loved. For weeks, he thoroughly investigated, spoke with social workers, verified references, and personally met with the family. They were a kind couple with years of experience caring for children, but something inside told him he couldn't rush. He couldn't risk Sophia ending up in a place where she wouldn't be protected. Each conversation, each visit, made him feel he was closer to making the right decision, but also that Sophia's fate depended on every detail. Finally, after what seemed like endless weeks of uncertainty, Steph approved the family. Although a weight was lifted from his chest, the fear of what might happen never completely disappeared. He had made a crucial decision, but he knew there was still much to do. He couldn't simply walk away. He knew he must remain present in Sophia's life, a constant pillar of support, someone she could trust, someone who would remind her that there was always a way out, even in the darkest moments. The transition to Sophia's new home was complicated at first. The nights were cold and silent, and Sophia would curl up in her bed, staring at the ceiling, lost in her thoughts. She couldn't help but think about her mother, about her old life, about what she had lost. The first weeks were filled with hidden tears and unexpressed fears. However, little by little, something began to change in her. The neighborhood children began to approach her, inviting her to play, and the smiles that began to appear on her face were a reflection of a hope that was beginning to ignite. Steph, as promised, was there, close by. He visited her every day, sometimes bringing stuffed animals, other times books, or even some snacks he knew she loved. And although the first visits were tense, with Sophia still insecure and reluctant, something broke inside her when she saw that Steph had not abandoned her. Each time he saw her, the welcome was a little warmer, her smile wider, her laughter louder. Little by little, the shadows that once surrounded her began to fade, replaced by a faint but growing light. It was in those moments when Steph knew he had done right. When he saw her playing basketball in the park with her small team jersey, her hair tied in a ponytail, he couldn't help but smile. Each shot, each rebound, each movement of her body was like a reflection of the girl who was beginning to find her place in the world, despite everything she had been through. It wasn't just about basketball, or even the games he took her to cheer for. It was about something much deeper. It was about seeing a girl bloom again, about seeing how the traces of the past began to fade, replaced by a future full of possibilities. And every time he saw her play, Steph couldn't help but feel proud. Proud of her, of course, but also of himself. He had listened to that inner voice, that whisper that told him something wasn't right. He had intervened when no one else did, when the silence of the morning didn't call for help. But he heard it. He had not only saved Sophia, but had also saved his own humanity, reaffirming his belief that sometimes what is right is not what is most convenient for us, but what calls us from the deepest part of our being. He had done the right thing, and that certainty was felt in his heart like a quiet fire, a light that would never go out. But despite everything, the road was not yet over. There were moments when Sophia would sit at the edge of the park, looking at the horizon with a distant expression, as if her thoughts flew far away, toward a past she still didn't want to leave behind. Steph knew his work didn't end there. Sophia would need time, and he was willing to give her all the time necessary, because for him, she was no longer just a child in trouble. She was a daughter he had promised to care for, a girl who had earned his unconditional love. And although the healing process would be long and complicated, he would never let her walk alone. With time, Sophia gradually became a young woman full of dreams and hope. Thanks to Steph's intervention and the foster family, her life had taken a radical turn. The future that once seemed gloomy was now filled with possibilities. The story of Steph and Sophia, although filled with shadows at the beginning, was much more than a simple lesson about kindness or intuition. It was a reminder of how the smallest decisions, those that might seem insignificant, can alter the course of an entire life. That day when Steph decided to divert his route to Sophia's house wasn't a grand gesture. He didn't save the world or face a movie villain. He didn't do anything extraordinary except follow his instinct, that whisper that told him something wasn't right. But without knowing it, that decision to look beyond the obvious was what changed Sophia's destiny forever. Imagine how easy it would have been for Steph to ignore that feeling, to continue on his way, to let routine take over. Why should he worry about a girl who, although he saw her daily, he didn't really know? Maybe he thought she was simply sick, or that there was something more trivial behind her absence. But when he looked at that empty window, something inside told him he couldn't let it pass. And that impulse, that spark of uncertainty, led him to discover that behind that facade of normality, Sophia was silently struggling. What Steph did afterward, and what over time became an unbreakable bond with the girl, was more than just saving her from a dangerous situation. It was, in a way, the first step in rebuilding the broken fabric of her life. From that moment on, Steph wasn't just a stranger passing by her street. He became a beacon of hope, someone who, even with a simple and everyday gesture like a smile or a greeting, showed Sophia that she wasn't alone in this world. That connection, although small, was the first brick of what would be a radical change in her life. And the surprising thing is that not even Steph knew the magnitude of what he was doing. He was just following his instinct, a subtle but powerful feeling that pushed him not to walk away. Perhaps in his heart, the thought that something wasn't right made him act, but what he didn't know was that by intervening, he had touched something much deeper, something he hadn't even anticipated: the true power of empathy. In a society where we are often too busy, distracted by our own lives, gestures like Steph's may seem almost accidental. A greeting, a smile on a gray day, a simple "Are you okay?" may seem trivial, almost social duty. But in some moments, those small gestures are the difference between despair and hope. Not because they completely solved the problem, but because, for an instant, they remind someone that there is someone else who cares. Steph didn't just change Sophia's life that day. Without knowing it, he also transformed his own existence. What began as an act of kindness, a manifestation of his intuition, allowed him to experience a deeper connection with another human being than he had ever imagined. And in that process, we discover that true greatness doesn't always come with fanfare or recognition. But in those moments when we stop and ask ourselves, what can I do for another? As the story of Steph and Sophia unfolds, it becomes more than a testimony of human generosity. It is a testament to what it means to be truly aware of others, to be present, to listen to that inner voice that tells us something isn't right, even when everything seems in order.